Honey, the white man is the ruler of everything as far as I've been able to find out. Maybe it's someplace way off in the ocean where the black man is in power, but we don't know nothing but what we see. So the white man throw down the load and tell the nigger man to pick it up. He pick it up because he have to, but he don't tote it. He hand it to his woman folks. The nigger woman is the mule of the world so far as I can see. I've been praying for it to be different with you. Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God, 1937.
When I was growing up in Live Oak, I would actually go by that house just to look at it and say to myself, I sure would like to have a house like that one day.
Growing up in Live Oak, Florida, I remember passing by this house that had been, you could tell, absolutely grand. Who had owned that house? When had it been built? It looked so different from all of the other shotgun houses that surrounded it. And that's how I first became interested in the story of Ruby McCollum.
I asked my parents at the dinner table, I said, who is Ruby McCollum? And my parents told me that I was not to talk about that.
This was on a Sunday morning. I never will forget it.
It's a quiet morning. White congregants are gathered in the First Methodist Church in downtown Live Oak. A doctor enters his office, Clifford Leroy Adams.
Halfway across town, we have an African-American woman get into a car with two of her children, start driving over to Dr. Adams' office.
Driving a blue Chrysler. That woman was Ruby McCollum. Everyone would have known who she is. She is the wealthiest African-American woman in Live Oak.
She had two children in her car that she pulled up in a hot August morning, and she left those children in the car. Today she could get arrested for that. She kept going back and forth looking to see if there were people in the waiting room. Then she had a concealed weapon in her pocketbook.
She finally goes into the doctor's office.
What happened next shook Suwannee County and Live Oak for years to come.
Black women did not shoot white men.
Why would she do something like that?
Something must have happened that was overwhelming for her to decide and act that way.
It was a shock to the community. And my mother was afraid that the KKK was going to turn this town upside and down.
When Ruby McCollum murdered Dr. Adams in 1952, it opened up a sinkhole into what lies beneath the quaint, nice facade of Suwannee County. We had to face our demons.
I was 9 years old when Dr. Adams died. I remember the morning very well. I lived out in the country about 12 miles out of town.
I was at summer camp.
Our floor manager, he come and stopped all of us and said, Dr. Adams just been killed.
My girlfriend's parents drove up. They both immediately jumped out of the car at the same time and ran up to her and grabbed her, and they were both crying loudly.
He was our family doctor, and so it was a shock to all of us.
No, I went down the day after the incident with my grandfather, my brother and I can remember pulling up to the back of Dr. Adams' office. I vividly remember it made an impression on me to see the bloody footprints coming out of the back of the office there.
My great-grandparents, Vero and Margie Musgrove, went and saw Dr. Adams just literally a few minutes before he was murdered. My great-grandfather Vero and my great-uncle Harold were two of the witnesses at the trial.
My name is Clifford Leroy Adams. My father and Dr. Adams were friends, and I was born a couple of months after the killing, so I was named after him.
You just couldn't hardly believe it, you know. Why would she do that? She had everything in the world.
I never knew Ruby McCollum, but for years her life has haunted mine. I became determined to discover the truth about her, a truth I felt in my heart had never been fully told. It turns out I wasn't the only one. Over 60 years after the murder of Dr. Adams, my team went on a journey to find the real Ruby McCollum. Ruby's son, Sam McCullum Jr., still lives in Live Oak, still lives at the great yellow stucco house. The house is slowly rotting away like an unhealed wound. I sent a letter to Sam Jr. asking him to talk with me. His reply, through a mutual friend, I don't talk about my mother.
I always say, I don't want to talk about that. Just let that stay where it's at. And that was kind of like his words, let it stay where it's at.
Others were ready to help tell Ruby's story, a story that began long before August 3rd, 1952.
The story of Ruby McCollum and Doc Adams takes place in a Florida that existed before NASA, before Disney, before the interstates.
Doc Adams comes from a long line of influential men.
My great-great-grandfather, Robert W. Adams, was the first Adams who came to Hamilton County. He came here before the time of the Civil War. After the Civil War, he opened the Adams store in White Springs. The Adams house in White Springs was built by his sons. My great-grandfather was Frank Adams, who was Robert W. Adams's oldest son, one of, I believe, 5 children. Frank was a banker and businessman. He was one of the people who started the Barnett Bank chain in Florida. He was also president of the Florida Senate in the early 1900s.
Ruby Jackson was born in 1909 in a rural area outside of Ocala, Florida. It was 40 years after the end of slavery.
Ruby McCollum was a black woman that came along during a very defining period of our history.
Slavery ended, black codes began, black codes ended, Jim Crow began. So you're talking a good 400 and some years of people pretty much having this sense of superiority.
Klan was running rampant. The Klan just had Florida in a stranglehold.
An African American living in the state of Florida had the highest chance of getting lynched out of any black person in the nation.
Living under the system of Jim Crow in the South was like living in hell.
The Florida Ku Klux Klan is the most powerful paramilitary organization in the United States between the 1920s and the 1950s. It has so much power. The Klan runs entire cities, it runs entire counties.
A lot of your KKK members was judges, was lawyers. was doctors. They put on those hoods, and those was the KKK guys.
I knew one gentleman that was proud to show you his KKK card from the 50s.
I was never really interested in the Klan. I thought, from what I could hear, sometimes things they did was probably good, but sometimes things they did wasn't good. So myself, I wouldn't be involved with it.
But on Saturdays, Friday evenings and Saturdays, the Ku Klux Klan would march downtown and look in all the stores.
I remember seeing the Klans march.
And if they caught a black man on the streets, they just beat him down.
It would be bad for any blacks to get around them at that time.
Ruby had a unique opportunity to receive an incredible education. She was able to attend the Fessenden Academy, which had the reputation of being one of the few places throughout the region where an African-American child could receive a world-class education.
Mr. Fessenden came down to Florida. He found the black kids having school in the old Union log cabin. So he built a school on this beautiful hill that became Fessenden Academy. And that was the greatest thing that could have happened in the whole state of Florida, because it was the best school, I guess, anywhere. It was just a miracle.
It attracted students from throughout the region, the Caribbean, as well as Africa. And it had a reputation of producing graduates that were both ambitious and incredibly talented.
Most of the graduates have that in them, a zest for knowledge and a desire to move beyond the ordinary circumstances that one might find themselves in. To always advance, to reach for something greater than they perhaps ever had. She had a pretty face and pretty hair, but I thought she was like reserved, very, very reserved. But I noticed it as like, and the kids would say, oh, she's like selfish. And she's conceited, or she's to herself, or was like that. It was just kid, and they can be very cruel, I know that.
My mama sent her to school, get her good education, all that.
I studied nursing there for 2 years. I've always wanted to relieve suffering.
The story goes that she'd actually been dating one young man, but decided to begin dating Sam McCullum because, in her opinion, he was more ambitious and that she would be able to go further in life. And so the two of them get married, and like a lot of other African Americans during this period in time, they decided to leave the segregated South and travel to New York. Sam McCullum's brother, Buck, had the good fortune to get involved in the life insurance business. He sends word to Sam that this may be a good opportunity for him and Ruby, and the couple make the decision to move back to Florida, eventually settling in Live Oak.
I remember her as a very beautiful black woman.
She was one of my favorite aunts.
In a very intelligent lady.
She was a good person in the church, African Baptist church. Sam put a lot of money into that church and made donations, and they were thought of as good people in the community. I think they were people were down and out. They could go to them and get a favor or get some help from them. So they were thought of as good people.
Ruby and Sam and their family were well known in Live Oak, very well known.
My cousins had everything you could name.
Now Ruby, she usually bought the grocers. And her husband, when he come with her, he usually stayed around the car. But he was a well-dressed man, well-mannered, real polite, and he always had a new car.
She always got a brand new Chrysler New Yorker.
Every time we saw her at age 6, 7 years old, she always says, "Here's a quarter for you." And I was glad to see something larger than a penny.
When you met Ruby, you could tell that she had money.
They were some of the richest people, you know, in Florida.
Sam used to come out and hunt quails on my grandmother's place, and he would sit to the table and eat with us and talk and laugh. I mean, he just was a simple person. Plus, he used to own all the jukeboxes that was in the nightclub.
The first time he walked in, he darkened the room. His whole body covered or blocked the light out. I said, he's lost.
He was opening the door for her and all this kind of stuff. Never heard anything out of him. Only he was Bolita King.
Bolita.
Bolita. Sam was known as the Bolita King for this area.
Bolita literally means little ball, and its earliest incarnation, it was very similar to the way the lottery is run. People would bet on which number would be chosen.
Tourism and citrus were the number 1 and 2 industries. Bolita may have been number 3 because it was just rampant.
Bolita was extremely popular all across Florida. And individual kingpins, you know, they could be making a couple $100,000 a year at that time just from the Bolita rackets.
And we can trace many fortunes in the state of Florida, many respectable fortunes, back to Bolita.
Oh, it was widespread. They were ushers in the church. They were deacons on the deacon boards in churches. They actually wrote the numbers.
The money was being made by a lot of big people. And there was a lot of big people in Live Oak involved outside of Sam McCullum.
And the name that kept coming up time and time again is that of Dr. Clifford Leroy Adams.
Oh yeah, I knew Dr. Adams. He was kind of a stocky kind of a man, intellectual looking gentleman, kind of with like, never like Newt Gingrich.
Now, how long had you known Dr. Adams?
Ever since 1945. About 3 months before Sonia was born. She is now 7 years old.
Dr. Adams was the people's doctor.
I was raised with many of you. I went to school with many of you. I dug ditches on the WPA with many of you. I rode turpentine woods and worked with timber around many of your homes. I have served many of you as a druggist in retail drugstores.
Leroy Adams was a powerful and popular guy.
Probably weighed at least 250, 300 pounds, but he wasn't. I wouldn't say he was fat, but he was just a big man. I would call him just a big man.
Dr. Adams was a huge man and very friendly and nice.
My recollection of Dr. Adams was he was kind. He was, I was not afraid to go to the doctor.
He lived right at the hospital. He could walk out his door into the hospital almost.
It wasn't just the black poor people. He took care of poor people.
We always thought he was a fine doctor, and he would make house calls back then. He'd go all the way out in the country to see if he was sick.
Oh yes, I'm sure that there were many people in Suwannee County that were treated by Dr. Adams that he never received a penny for.
Well, if you had like fried chicken or something, well, he'd grab a piece of that, and he's just a good old fellow. Just made himself at home.
Dr. Adams and Sam McCullum hunted together. Dr. Adams was lots of time would go to Sam's house, and I guess they would talk and have dinner together. The way he carried himself, he thought he knew everything, about everything. And he thought he knew the black community better than anybody else.
Since that time, have you been more or less continuously under his care as a physician?
Well, slightly, in a way, and then in a way I wasn't. I discontinued going to him too very often after I found out what it was all about.
There were all kinds of daily interactions that put black women in very peculiar and difficult places.
Did he at any time have any other relations with you other than as a private physician and doctor?
Black women in the segregated South were almost always vulnerable. They could be approached, flirted with, and they knew what that meant. They knew that that was the introduction to a nightmare.
Tell us if you ever had sexual intercourse with Dr. Adams and where it was.
It was in my home in 1948, the first time I ever had any sexual relations with Dr. Adams.
We just couldn't believe it because it was just impossible that just things like that didn't happen.
To me, it wasn't. Not really. I seen him right in the hospital messing around with the women. I can remember hearing him ask one woman, he put sort of put her on the butt and he's asked her about, when can I get some of this or something like that, you know.
And he came back out there next morning about 9:30 and took me upstairs and laid me down on the bed and began the intercourse.
White men maintained relationships, short-term and long-term, with black women, but none of that was ever supposed to rise to the surface. It was never to be discussed in decent company. All of that was supposed to be submerged.
And when it was finished, he left, and he said, "I will be back some other time."
White men in the Jim Crow South, they were able to take black women at will and do what they wanted to do with them without any kind of fear of punishment or even persecution within the community.
And he said, "I'm not afraid, and I don't want you to be afraid of it. No one is going to bother me. That is a definite." I told him okay, and that made me begin to be afraid of him.
She was a black, good-looking lady. She probably started going to the doctor for medical reasons, and I believe the doctor taking advantage of them.
There was almost a law that if a white man wanted to go with somebody's wife, he could do that.
Did you continue then after this first time to have sexual relations with Dr. Adams up until the time of his death?
Yes, sir.
My cousin Jordan, he was an older man. He told me that was a law, that if a white man wanted to go with a black woman, that was his right, that the black woman didn't really have the right to deny.
It was a cultural practice in the United States that goes back to slavery times.
He said he was coming back, and he kept coming back. Neighbors saw him coming and going.
In fact, Ben, I had a cousin lived right pretty close to her, and they said there wasn't nothing to see him every morning, or in the mornings coming out the house, Ruby McCollum's house.
The woman will weigh the options. What are her chances for survival if she says no?
What consent means is it means that a person has full understanding of the consequences of giving consent.
And so she consents. Is that still a consensual relationship? I don't know.
The question would be, could she afford not to consent?
I don't know whether she had a choice to enter into them, but I guarantee you once she was in it, she didn't have a choice of whether to get out or not.
Ruby McCollum was raped. When you have a history of the raping of black women in this country, in the South, the way it was for Ruby McCollum, I don't care what anybody says. Living with the fear of not doing what a white man told you to do was death. Not just death for you, but death for your family, burn your house down, hurt your kids.
Dr. Adams had a lot going on that people didn't really know about. It was much kind of a Jekyll Hyde scenario, and that he was the saint one time, but then he had all these evil things going on otherwise.
Everything that Doc Adams did from the time that he was first going to go to pharmacy school and then medical school, he cheated everybody. He lied to everybody. He got into medical school on false pretenses. He just lied to everybody.
I took pride in Leroy's success. I thought he was a big man. I resented every criticism made against him, though I knew he was doing some fronting for Sam McCullum in the Bolita racket, and I knew of his relationship with Ruby. In 1949, he got into his first trouble with the law. A federal grand jury indicted him for submitting fraudulent bills and collecting money for services he claimed he had rendered to veterans, but which in fact he had not rendered at all. He was in real trouble. About 40 character witnesses went from here to help Leroy, and we beat the case. The jury found him not guilty. Laverne Blue, quoted by William Bradford Huey.
With a personality like his, which was a little off, not getting caught made him bolder, so that he'd take greater and greater risks.
Dr. C. Leroy Adams announced this week that he would be a candidate for the state Senate.
If you were elected to the state Senate out of Suwannee County, you had power.
A result of the Kefauver investigation of organized gambling was passage by Congress in 1951 of a law requiring professional gamblers to purchase federal license or tax stamps. William Bradford Huey.
Sam McCullum is one of 10 African Americans in the Suwannee County area who register with federal government, and now Sam's alleged Bolita activities becomes public.
That Bolita has flourished in this county for years under Bolita Sam McCullum has been freely discussed. It remained for the new federal law passed to help curb gambling in this nation to point the finger at the racket that has been in vogue here for years. Suwannee Democrat, January 11th, 1952.
You know, if you talk to the old timers in Live Oak, they will tell you Sam and Ruby were a team. It wasn't Sam, it was Ruby, it was Sam and Ruby.
Ruby begins to exhibit signs of despondency and anxiety.
I have treated this patient for a nervous disorder. I treated her and put her in the hospital, Brewster Hospital, Jacksonville. She was there first in January, when she was a patient for about 12 days. Dr. William H. McCullum.
Ruby was under such pressure that it got to a point where the irrational part of her mind took over.
Suwannee Democrat is putting pressure on not only Sam McCullum, but also local law enforcement to cease their gambling activities.
So far as I know, no effort has been made to stop the racket by any of our law enforcement officers, and that includes our sheriff, constable, and mayor.
Sim Howell, it's his first term as sheriff, was elected in 1948 on a mission, a campaign promise to get rid of Bolita.
The sheriff ran this county. I mean, people ride around knocking on people's doors. You got your number today? And I mean, this was just in every neighborhood.
The law enforcement was taking the majority of the money.
Bill Ware, Brantford druggist, queried the sheriff about McCullum. "What about Bolita Sam?" he asked. "Why haven't you been able to do anything about it?" Emmett Peter Jr., Tampa Tribune, January 1952.
Once the Tampa Tribune picked up news of this story, Sheriff Howell announced that he would no longer be seeking office. Doc Adams' son is killed in a car crash in Texas. Around the same time, Ruby McCollum suffered another setback and was readmitted to the Brewster Hospital in Jacksonville for psychiatric treatment.
She was there about 9 days. Dr. William H. McCullum.
There are very interesting contrasts that arise in May of 1952. It's in that month that Doc Adams is celebrating his victory in the Democratic primary as a part of his campaign for the Florida Senate seat. At the same time, Ruby has yet again experienced another breakdown, and she is headed back to the Brewster Hospital in Jacksonville.
He'd been elected to the state Senate, and he had hopes, sensible, reasonable hopes, of being the governor of Florida. Why would he back down? Why would he slack off? Things were going fine.
In July 1952, Doc Adams travels with his wife to Chicago to participate in the Democratic National Convention. When Doc Adams returns to Live Oak, he returns to work.
I think Ruby felt abused by Dr. Adams, and she was very, very angry.
From what I heard, people thought that she was his willing mistress.
When I think about a woman not having a choice, using the word affair, relationship, it doesn't even come into play. There's no equal choice.
Now, it's just possible that she felt like she had to do what Dr. Adams said. But I strongly suspect that it was more than that maybe she felt an attraction to him, and she may have even been, say, honored that this white man, this white doctor, was showing an interest in her. She may have.
Ruby was not a well person. I mean, she had had a lot of emotional difficulties prior to that.
I was told too that he was giving her drugs.
She was addicted to something. She needed her shots from the doc.
The way that people should view Doc Adams, I think they should make up their own minds what he was and what he wasn't.
There are two African American women waiting for Dr. Adams in the colored waiting room. It's that Sunday morning that Ruby McCollum walks into his office.
She was a thinking sort of lady, and before she thought or before she did anything, there was thought behind it.
Ruby was not really a violent person. I knew a person. My mama and them knew. I mean, she just was an ordinary lady. She wasn't the kind of person that would just fly off and kill somebody.
She was angry. It was premeditated.
I didn't think he deserved to be shot in the back, but something had to be done.
My father was singing in the choir at church. He was tapped on the shoulder and called out to go and see about Doc Adams, who had been shot. I don't even think the first word that he'd been killed was just that he'd been shot.
Ruby McCollum has already left. She's locked the door behind her, gotten into her two-tone Chrysler, driven home with her two children that were still inside the car. Law enforcement arrives within minutes. They eventually get the door opened, go in and find Doc Adams lying dead on the floor between the colored examination room and the colored waiting area.
The 42-year-old doctor was found clutching a $100 bill in his hand, Sheriff Sim P. Howell reported. Swanee Democrat, August 8, 1952.
In Live Oak, in the 50s, everybody knew their role. When Ruby McCollum shot Dr. Adams, it was completely and utterly out of character.
Ruby returns home as if nothing has happened.
She makes a bottle for her daughter, and she waits on the police.
And they weren't really worried about the doc, and they weren't really worried about Ruby. They were worried about the fact that Sam was paying them kickbacks, protection money.
When the law came, she took the sheriff's deputy up into the bathroom to pay him off, as casually as she and her husband had done to keep from being arrested for operating their Bolita game. Zora Neale Hurston.
And I says to her again, Ruby, what in the world caused you to kill Dr. Adams? She looked at me very calmly and coolly and says, Mr. Gray, I don't know why I shot him. I said, Ruby, what did you do with the gun you shot Dr. Adams with? And she said she threw it in the hedge at the back of the house in the bamboos.
This is the gun. It's a Smith & Wesson 38 Special. And this is the gun that Ruby McCollum killed the doctor with. My dad was clerk of circuit court of Swanee County. And the shape it's in is exactly the shape it was when she had it. It was nickel plated, and you can see it's worn pretty bad. Me and my brother, we found this gun, and we played with a gun. When my dad got home, we put it up before he got in the house. It had 4 empty shells in it.
And a mob of white Klansmen surrounded the county jail.
They was all gathered up in front of the courthouse. I walked over and asked somebody, and they told me, you know, she had killed Dr. Adams, and they was trying to get in there.
At that time, there was a problem. There was a fear of people being lynched. Let's be upfront about that.
Shortly after the slaying, 22 state patrolmen patrolled the streets of this tobacco center town after restless crowds began gathering as reports of the shooting spread.
These folks who just a few minutes before were peacefully singing songs of worship to God are now, in many cases, calling to lynch this black woman for that murder.
They was going to take her out and hang her.
My dad was a man of the law. After he received a phone call saying that Ruby had shot Dr. Adams, he told the sheriff, get her immediately out of this county, get her to a safe place.
And some of the crowd see the sheriff pulling off with Ruby. And one of the men in the crowd had a Cadillac. And they chased the sheriff's car, and his deputy said that this Cadillac was so close to the sheriff's car that the sheriff gave him the order. He was in the backseat of the sheriff's car with a shotgun, and say the sheriff gave him an order that if this car pull up on the side, blow the tires out. That's how Ruby got the rape.
Dr. Adams' widow pleaded for the community not to cause harm to the black community.
You know, it's unfortunate that his wife gets left out of the equation and his daughter gets left out, because I do feel for them. They lost their dad that day, just like Sonia and Sam and Loretta and Kay lost their dad.
Sam was out in the country to his farm. They drove out there and told Sam what happened. Sam came back, got in the car with Charles Hall, and came back to his house.
He packs a suitcase full of money, grabs some clothes for the children, and he sets off.
I was in Sunday school. Well, I looked out the window and I saw this Chrysler pull up in the yard of the church. And so I went and told my daddy that I thought Ruby was out there. It was Sam and the 3 kids. This was on a Sunday. And then on a Monday, my father said that Sam had died.
Well, the story was that Sam had a heart attack in Gainesville.
He had known heart trouble, and if I were to hear that my wife has just murdered the most prominent white man in town and I was a black person who was running an illegal numbers game, partially protected by this doctor and others, I think I would have had a heart attack too.
You always wonder, did he actually die of a heart attack or what happened?
They want to believe that he was able to take his money, leave the country, and perhaps was somewhere in Cuba living the good life. As it turns out, that was not the case.
Charles Hall told me Sam swallowed all his heart pills on the way to Ocala, a form of suicide to avoid facing the certain ruin that would have followed. One thing Charles Hall never mentioned was a suitcase full of money.
Sam McCullum had a suitcase of money that he intended to go for the care of his children. He turned it over to his relatives. They hid it in a barn.
Somebody was following the money, so they stole most of it.
There was rumors that his friends took some of the money after he died, but I don't know that. You know how rumors are.
When I got there, my mother said, the old dogs stole the money. They said, where'd you have the money? In the barn? But I did manage to pick up some that was dropped. It was a very frustrating time to everybody.
She missed a good thing. She had Liz Adams, her family. She would not be in that city trouble.
Thousands of mourners from all walks of life crowded into and around the First Methodist Church of Live Oak for the funeral of Dr. C. Leroy Adams Tuesday afternoon. It was the largest and most sincerely attended funeral ever witnessed in Suwannee County. Suwannee Democrat, August 8, 1952.
What all the people in Live Oak wanted, what the sheriff wanted, what everybody wanted, was for this to be a case which there was a squabble and the black woman killed the doctor. Pure and simple. And it turns out, of course, it wasn't simple at all.
A.K. Black, an attorney, is going through Dr. Adams' belongings after his death and finds Laverne Blue's will amongst Dr. Adams' things. Mr. Blue is the owner of the Blue Lodge, which at the time is a prominent hotel.
3 or 4 weeks after the funeral, Jeff Elliott came into the office and asked me if the doc had been my heir, if I had made a will leaving all my property to Dr. Adams. Why, of course not, I said.
That will left all of Laverne Blue's property and his body to Clifford Leroy Adams.
I mean, how brilliant is that? I'll get the body, I'll kill you, I'll get the body, and then I'll take all your stuff and nobody will ever know.
When I first held it in my hand, I had to go sit down. I thought I'd faint. I am now certain that he had planned to kill me and take my property.
We went up there to see her. My mama asked, well, why you have to kill the duck for? She said, "'Cause I want to."
Live Oak had never seen anything like the Ruby McCollum event. And there had to be a voice. There had to be someone or something to lead through this event. And the Democrat emerged as that voice. Whatever was missing in the Democrats' coverage, the Pittsburgh Courier made every effort to attempt to report. The Pittsburgh Courier was a prominent, popular African-American newspaper. They contacted Zora Neale Hurston and sent her to Live Oak to get the true story, the real story.
Zora Neale Hurston in the 1950s was in the declining years of her life. She had been a prominent writer, activist, anthropologist. She wrote from a black perspective and a black woman's perspective.
She herself was a native of the state and was very familiar with the circumstances and the personalities who were involved.
She's looking for some avenue to reclaim, to rekindle that fire that she had 20 and 30 years ago.
She was an important voice, a very important voice, in the telling of the Ruby McCollum story.
I had been sent to Live Oak by the Pittsburgh Courier, first and foremost, to get an interview with the defendant in this case, Zora Neale Hurston.
Well, she couldn't get access. Rightly or wrongly, she thought she was denied access because she was black.
The man that would stand in Zora Neale Hurston's way would be Judge Hal Adams.
Judge Adams was a character. He'd been on the bench for over 40 years. He knew his way around the law. His spittoon cup, he was just the quintessential Southern gentleman that could scare the pants off of people by his attitude, by his demeanor.
He was very impressive. He was a brilliant man, and he was a very understanding man. He put my father in jail.
I have tried many homicide cases, and I want this one to proceed like all the others. Judge Hal Adams, quoted by Zora Neale Hurston.
Probably one of the few lucky things that Ruby McCollum does is that she picks up Frank Cannon to represent her.
My father grew up outside of Live Oak in a very poor area.
Doc Adams was Grandma's doctor, and she thought he absolutely hung the moon. She could not imagine how in the world he could even think of defending somebody that had shot her doctor.
The last surviving adult who was in the courtroom during Ruby's trial is Curtis Awe.
That was the first time I was ever on a jury duty or anything, you know. Judge Adams, he was a rough-looking fellow, and I had heard lots about him. he was bad, you know. We weren't supposed to talk to nobody. We weren't supposed to read no papers and all this kind of stuff, you know. So we weren't even supposed to talk to one another.
The courtroom was full of men, white men, of course.
What comes to mind is an old Far Side cartoon, which has a dog on trial, and the judge is a cat, the jurors are cats, the bailiff is a cat, and in fact, everybody in the courtroom watching the trial are cats as well. And that would very much be what a trial for an African American would be like in the Deep South.
For most African Americans, they knew there was no justice system for them. They knew that the courts were biased. They knew that the juries were rigged.
And she came on out and stood crossways at the door and opened a pocketbook and got something, got a bill out and said, "Give me a receipt for this." And he says, "I don't keep no books." He said, "Come down here tomorrow and Thelma will run over the books and tell you what is on." And she says, "Here's the book." And he said, "I ain't got no books, I done told you." He said, "Furthermore, that ain't half of the money what you owe me." And she said, "How much do I owe?" And he said, "You owe me more than $100. And she said, "I'm going to pay my part and the other fella's going to pay his." And he said, "Well, it matters a damn with me. I'm going to get mine if I have to carry it to the judge's office." And she said, "I know you will. You can get yours."
The state charges the woman shot the physician in an argument over a bill for professional services. Swanee Democrat, December 19th, 1952.
Live Oak was unified in the voice that Ruby had shot Dr. Adams over an unpaid medical bill, nothing more, nothing less.
It soon became apparent that there was a much more complicated relationship between Ruby McCollum and Doc Adams.
Do you know how many times this defendant called on Dr. Adams during the 3.5 years that you said you had known her?
That is hard to say because she came in the office quite often.
What do you mean by quite often?
Daily.
Daily?
Daily.
Now, during these daily visits you spoke of, did you ever see any arguments?
I have heard.
Heard what?
I have heard of an argument.
How many times?
We object.
What was it that Thelma Curry overheard Ruby and the doctor arguing about? Why had Ruby been coming to the doctor's office every day?
The entire relationship between the defendant and Dr. Adams is certainly admissible.
The objection is sustained.
I can only imagine the situation that Ruby McCollum was in, all of the tragedy that had taken place around her, and all the eyes in the courtroom and many other eyes around the state were interested and plugged into the words that she was about to say.
Most Negro spectators had come from a distance to hear what Ruby McCollum was going to tell. 6 had come from as far as Fort Lauderdale. Jacksonville was well represented. Local Negroes were conspicuously absent. Zora Neale Hurston.
What is your name?
Ruby McCollum.
She was a very nice-looking woman, best I remember. So I just say she was just a nice built and nice-looking woman.
The very boldness of her act and the mystery surrounding it have made her a heroine to some. Zora Neale Hurston.
How much family did you have?
Well, there were 4 children, 1 boy and 3 girls.
What were their ages?
The boy was 18, the next girl was 11, and the next one was 6 years old, and the baby was a year old.
She does testify at the trial, but she is silenced on so much that she wants to say and she attempts to say, but is not allowed to say.
We object on the ground it is. We object upon the grounds that it is shown as a confusing issue.
The court has ruled the objection is sustained.
African American women who spoke out about sexualized violence and rape were incredibly courageous. Incredibly courageous. They risked everything to testify.
The Swanee Democrat never mentions Ruby's testimony, never mentions that she had had an illicit love affair with Dr. Adams.
There's just some things you don't talk about polite company. And they pretty much covered the gamut with the Ruby McCollum case.
In my mind, part of the trial, the main purpose of the trial was about protecting Dr. Adams' reputation.
My dad and I had a difference of opinion about Ruby. He was never convinced that Dr. Adams had had relationships with Ruby, which I find amazing.
And did you become pregnant by Dr. Adams after you began to have sexual relations with him?
Yes, I did. I became pregnant in 1950, and the baby was born in 1951. Now she's a year old.
The first time I saw the baby, I said to my mother, and she told me to shut up. But I said, that baby look white.
It's one thing to carry on an illicit sexual affair behind closed doors, but to have the truth confirmed in flesh and blood is a completely different matter.
Frank Cannon, her attorney, wants to submit this child, this biracial child, as evidence.
At this time, the defendant has present the child that is testified about by this witness in the balcony of this courtroom.
We object to the statement.
Up in the balcony, Ruby McCollum's sister-in-law held up Loretta at that very moment for all of the courtroom to see. And that really becomes an act of defiance.
Judge Adams instructed the jury not to look.
He told me not to look up in an altar or nothing. I mean, and I didn't look, because he told me not to, and I didn't. Some of the rest of the jurors did look.
People saw the baby.
The evidence is right there in front of them.
That there was no denying that this child, flesh and blood, was the product of the sexual relationship between Ruby McCollum and Doc Adams.
I mean, she looked just like Dr. Adams.
Loretta being held up in that courtroom on that day, just imagine that beautiful little girl looking down at her mother, not really knowing what's going on. And the judge telling everybody not to look at the child because that's confirmation.
White men were not really segregationists. They were what one African American called a nighttime integrationist. That they were interested in integration only under the cover of darkness, and particularly with black women.
To have a prominent white doctor, a man in the community, people respected him from all over, a candidate for high political office, to see that he had fathered a child, a biracial child, it was a shock.
They didn't want to think that Dr. Adams was a man that would sleep with a black woman.
It was something that the white establishment was probably not ready to comprehend.
Dad could not accept that Dr. Adams had fathered a child by Ruby, whereas there's just no doubt in my mind that he did.
A black man wanting to have sex with a white woman, he'd be hanging from the nearest tree. It was a double standard. That's just how things had always been done.
Ruby had one child with Dr. Adams. In the black community, the rumor was that Ruby was pregnant again.
Now, I will ask you if you were pregnant at the time you were in Dr. Adams' office over here across the street.
Yes, sir.
By whom?
By Dr. Adams.
She just said she had one by him, you know, and that she was pregnant at the time. And that they give her some kind of shot down at the reef to keep her from having a baby. And to me, she sounded like she was telling the truth. I mean, you know.
The Ruby McCollum case, it's always about the money, about the unpaid doctor's bill.
Perhaps people would think that the whole town of Live Oak must have been absolutely insane to have accepted this version of events. But that's absolutely not true. The people of Live Oak are and were very good people. They simply had a reality that had been constructed for them.
It wasn't just Live Oak that had these things going on. It was just Live Oak that got in the spotlight when Ruby McCollum shot Dr. Adams.
The case of Dr. Adams and Ruby McCollum is not rare. A lot of white men, as you call it, get messed up with nigger women. You men of the jury know men who are doing the same thing.
The entire South had constructed its own reality.
Loretta Adams, the fruit of the body of Dr. C. Leroy Adams, was right here in this courtroom, but prevented from being exhibited to the jury. The state has sought to keep all evidence from reaching your ears. It is a matter of conscience.
When the law says one thing and the social mores say another, people may take things into their own hands.
Everybody knew that Ruby had shot Dr. Adams. It was done in the waiting room in front of all these people, so you couldn't ask for her to be turned, completely free. Daddy certainly didn't believe that Ruby deserved to die, so he argued for a second-degree murder conviction rather than the death penalty.
You have the authority to render any one of 5 verdicts. First-degree murder. First-degree murder with recommendation to mercy. Second-degree murder. Manslaughter. Or a verdict of not guilty. Judge Hal Adams, instructing the jury, December 20th, 1952.
My dad, who was the alternate jury, and I think he felt blessed that he was not have to go into the back to make the decision whether or not Ruby was guilty or not.
The jury was not just passing judgment on the crime of murder, it was passing judgment on everything that Ruby McCollum had come to represent.
The courtroom crowd, which had dwindled in size in the closing hours of the trial, took the verdict without any display of emotions.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Ruby McCollum, guilty of murder in the first degree. So say we all. Verdict is read by Judge Adams.
The sentence under Florida law for such a verdict is death in the electric chair.
Florida had not executed a woman since 1848.
I couldn't have went there for her. No, I could have found her for murder.
All white jury, mostly farmers, mostly uneducated people. All they know, hate a nigger. It wasn't no justice. Kill this nigger for killing our doctor.
But I hate to say it, I think most of the juries, when they went, that's what they knew, what they gonna do before they ever had the trial. She was guilty before they ever heard the trial.
It was all routine. Swanee Democrat.
Ruby's to blame for a lot of her trial going the way it did. Did I feel sorry for her? I feel sorry for anyone who gets angry enough to kill someone, but that's the consequences.
If she would have been found innocent, the Klan would have burnt liable.
It made all my family upset.
When Ruby McCollum was sentenced to death, she became the only woman waiting for execution in the state of Florida. Would that sentence be carried out?
After Ruby's trial, she is locked up in the Swanee County Jail. Her attorneys start the process of launching an appeal, and new legal assaults on the McCollum wealth begin.
The attorney whose prosecution placed Mrs. Ruby McCollum in the shadow of the death chair, A.K. Black, has resigned as state attorney for Swanee County, Florida. He quit his post to represent Mrs. Flory Adams, white, widow of the slain Dr. C. Leroy Adams, who has filed a $100,000 suit against Mrs. McCullum and the estate of her late husband, Sam McCullum. Zora Neale Hurston.
Dad did want to watch out for her. He was like that. He had a big heart. Yes, he could be very, very firm, but he had a big heart for people that he thought were not being treated fairly, under the circumstances that, their husband being murdered.
The Pittsburgh Courier contracted with Zora Neale Hurston to produce a series on the life of Ruby McCollum, which they published during the spring of 1953.
Zora Neale Hurston's articles in the Pittsburgh Courier makes it seem like she has been in constant contact with Ruby McCollum. When the Pittsburgh Courier finds out that Zora Neale Hurston has not actually interviewed Ruby, they fire her. Zora Neale Hurston is in need of money. She wants to get this story completed, so she contacts one of her friends, William Bradford Huey. He agrees that he'll stop by Live Oak and see if he can complete the interviews.
Huey thought that he was going to be successful, that it really wasn't going to be that much trouble.
He's told by law enforcement that he has to get permission of Circuit Judge Hal Adams.
I don't want a dead man smeared. I don't want this case commercialized or sensationalized. I want it ended in a quiet, orderly manner.
Before Ruby McCollum goes to the electric chair, she'll talk with a reporter.
When Huey got into a story, he would get involved, and he would get emotional, and he would get personally involved. And he was so outraged at the way Ruby was being treated and at the way that he was being treated that he just determined he was going to see this thing through. Seeing it through meant that Ruby was going to get an appeal.
I had to help Ruby get a new trial to keep her alive. William Bradford Huey.
He considers himself maybe the best reporter in America of the 20th century.
With Huey, one of the things you never want to forget about is the element of personal ego and stubbornness and pride.
I'm the best goddamn reporter you will ever meet. That's what he said.
William Bradford Huey is contacted by Mr. Laverne Blue.
I owe my life to Ruby. She was the first one to discover that he was a monster, and she killed him, and she rendered us all a service. And I think this community ought to erect a monument to her. Laverne Blue.
William Bradford Huey discovers in conversations with folks at Blue Cross that they had had a problem with the Suwannee County Hospital, which of course had been co-founded by Doc Adams.
Up until August 3rd, 1952, the Suwannee County Hospital was a headache to us and an unwarranted expense to our subscribers. Since that date, Suwannee County has become a bright spot on our map and a hopeful area for our subscribers. H.A. Schroeder, Executive Director of Blue Cross in Florida, quoted by William Bradford Huey.
All those patients that he had been treating at no cost were in reality being claimed by Doc Adams as tenants on his farm who he needed to provide health care for.
He should have gone to prison. Instead, she just shot him.
But then after you go back and look at all the stuff they brought out, well, then maybe they should have just turned her loose and give her a pat on the back. I don't know.
William Bradford Huey begins working closely with Frank Cannon, her attorney.
He and my dad got along just extremely well. They were constantly in touch with each other, and they were just a grand help to each other.
It became the dominant feature in our life. It took over everything that we did.
And if Mr. Huey hadn't done all the publicity, gotten the magazine articles and things, this probably would have just wound up another case.
In the summer of 1954, the Florida Supreme Court ruled in favor of Ruby McCollum's appeal.
In a cause wherein state of Florida was plaintiff, Ruby McCollum was defendant. On the 20th day of July, A.D. 1954, the said judgment of the Circuit Court is hereby reversed and a new trial ordered. The Honorable B.K. Roberts, Chief Justice, this 5th day of August, 1954.
The court ruled that Circuit Judge Hal W. Adams erred in his conduct of the trial by allowing the jury to inspect the scene of the shooting in the absence of the defendant and in his own absence part of the time.
That was the one area that they said we need a new trial. They threw out all that work.
In 1982, Brad Rogers interviewed William Bradford Huey about the legal strategy. This audio is not an actor reading Huey's words. It is the voice of Huey himself.
With a new trial coming up, first thing Cannon did was to file what's called the suggestion of insanity. Once the defense raises that question of insanity, the judge must appoint 2 psychiatrists.
In his testimony, Dr. McCullough said that in the time he last saw the woman, She had lost somewhere between 60 and 80 pounds and refused to eat. He said that she seemed to be afraid that someone was trying to poison her and would not eat food unless it was brought to her by her brother, and that she reached the state where he had to taste it himself before she would eat. He testified that he was informed that she remained on a cot in the corner of her cell, lying on the springs. She felt that her mattress was poisoned, and she covered herself from head to foot with a blanket to keep out the gas fumes she thought were being put in her cell. She also kept 2 plugs in her nose to keep out this imagined gas. Spontaneous crying and marked refusal to cooperate were other factors discussed. Suwannee Democrat, October 1st, 1954.
3 years ago, she had been in the high cotton, possessed by the 2 big men in the community. Now the 2 big men were decomposed in their graves, and Ruby was the shabby remnant which survived. William Bradford Huey.
The court found the woman unable to carry on a rational defense.
That gives a court the ability to hold a person indefinitely.
Ruby McCollum was ordered to the criminal section of the state mental hospital by Circuit Judge Hal W. Adams, the Suwannee Democrat.
William Bradford Huey comes to Ruby McCollum's sanity hearing, sees her walk out of the courtroom. It's the only time he gets to see her. As she's walking out of the courtroom, he is served with papers showing that he's been in contempt of court.
They're going to put him in the same cell that they just took Ruby McCollum out of.
When Huey first heard about the sanity hearing, he tracked down one of the doctors and shared his views on Ruby's mental state. Judge Adams considered this tampering with a witness.
I'm the only man, only reporter who has ever been tried for contempt of court for some action occurring 30 miles from the courtroom.
Huey became part of the story, and that's the cardinal sin for a reporter, is to become part of the story.
This contempt charge against Huey is going to result in a situation that's going to prevent him from publishing his book, Ruby McCollum, Woman in the Suwannee Jail, in the state of Florida for decades.
The Ruby McCollum book was a sensation, but it was a mark upon Suwannee County and upon Live Oak, and that's how most people see it even today.
He considered that book a journalistic masterpiece. Those are his words.
In 1982, Brad Rogers asked Huey who won the battle between him and Judge Adams.
There's one winner, and that's the people who hate hypocrisy. I wrote the book because I hate hypocrisy.
The winner was not Ruby McCollum, a woman Huey discussed with casual disregard.
Ruby had a good education. She was ambitious. Much of what happened to her, she brought it on herself. In many ways, she's just as guilty as a doctor. Dr. Adams didn't rape Ruby McCollum. Dr. Adams screwed Ruby McCollum the first time in her own bed in her own home. The woman herself was guilty of all sorts of things, including the crime of murder. I don't think that there would have been any great, terrible injustice had Ruby McCollum been electrocuted by the state of Florida.
If that was the case, why did William Bradford Huey write the book?
The book was written just because of human conflict between Judge Adams and me.
Nobody knows anything about me except I am Ruby.
It must have been very difficult for Ruby. Before the murder, she had been someone. She had been someone special. And then suddenly, after the murder, she becomes a non-entity.
When, in the opinion of the hospital authorities, she might regain her faculties, she is to be brought back forthwith and tried for the crime.
That's still sweeping the case under the rug because you never have to have a trial. You never have to have a trial. Once she goes away, they say, well, she never got to be competent.
They did use Chattahoochee as a way of punishing people that didn't get the death penalty.
Dr. Adams was dead. His life was over. At least she got to live.
That's the worst travesty of the entire case, the fact that she's sent to Chattahoochee. Decades of investigations of that institution demonstrate that it was an awful place to be.
Was she insane at the time that she shot Doc Adams? I think a really good question to ask is how you define sanity. What Ruby did was perhaps challenging the definition of what sane and insane meant. What Ruby did was challenge a lot of definitions.
If it had not been for Frank Cannon, Ruby McCollum would have likely died in Chattahoochee.
It was one of these things that Daddy just worked at, and it just consumed him, and it consumed all of us in many ways.
He was very tenacious about what he did, and he stayed with it through the years.
In 1972, the Florida Supreme Court decides that Ruby McCollum is not guilty by reason of insanity. And with that judgment, she is no longer living under the shadow of this murder charge.
I do remember when Ruby McCollum was brought back from Chattahoochee. I certainly wanted to see her, and I did see her when she was brought back.
First, when I did seen her, I had to peek around the corner first before I go in there and introduce myself. I was just scared. I ain't never been through nothing like that. You know, nobody had done killed somebody.
I would say she was very sharp, considering what she had gone through, and always had the same smile. I'd always look for that.
Once I peeked around the corner and seen her around, I just went up to her and introduced myself, which she remembered me. She was happy to be out.
And I just remember her taking a lot of pride in her appearance. Even if she just had on a simple house dress, she wanted that to look nice. She wanted her hair brushed. She wanted things to be a certain way. She would get up and she would go into the kitchen and she would take 2 eggs from the fridge, crack them open, put them in the glass and drink them. Put the glass in the sink and that was it.
She was a sweet, kind person. I couldn't believe what they say she did because it didn't seem like it.
I just loved to hear her talk because she had this slow, very precise way of talking and just almost like, okay, get it out, you know, kind of, because she would talk so slow, and my mother talked slow just like her. They both had that slow drawl about their speech. And I was happy to have grandmother in the house, of course, because you know what you can't get away with mom and dad, you can get away with grandma.
After being released from Chattahoochee, she gives a few interviews, but in those interviews, she doesn't discuss what happened with Dr. Adams. She claims that she has no memory of those events. She can't even acknowledge that he is the father of her child.
But as far as her being in her right mind, I believe she was in her right mind. She knew everyone and everyone that was around her, right up until the point where she was in New Horizons. She couldn't speak because she had had a few strokes. So when I went in, I told her who I was. I told her this was her great-grandson. His name was Kai. And although she couldn't sit up and verbally speak to me, she held her hand out and grabbed his leg. So that let me know that she knew who I was and what I was saying to her. She knew that she wanted to go home. She knew that Ocala was not her home.
Talk about she won't go home. You know, when somebody won't go home, that means she ain't gonna live long.
Ruby Jackson McCullum lived as a free woman for 18 years after her release from Chattahoochee. She died in 1992, 40 years after her husband and Dr. Clifford Leroy Adams.
The ghost of Ruby McCollum still roams the streets of Live Oak.
To me, Live Oak, Florida is the best place in the world to live.
Live Oak is a very wonderful place to live. To raise kids, you feel safe around here.
Wouldn't swap it for any place.
I think we've been pretty progressive over the years, and not only in our cultural and our educational and social events today. You know, the blacks and whites are we get along good.
Well, it depends on who you talk to. Those are the people that everything is good for them.
I've seen race relations change during my lifetime radically for the better, and I hope they'll continue to change for the better.
You don't have to scratch far below the surface still today to find those that are very prejudiced. I can go to several coffee shops in town, and there's still some strong feelings.
I just wish that Live Oak could open their minds and hearts to live in a better way.
There's certain people have turned a deaf ear to this case because they feel like the justice wasn't done properly.
My dad's final thoughts, he wonders if Ruby did get a fair trial.
When Zora Neale Hurston says that the truth about this case lies on the other side of silence, she was absolutely correct.
I think change had to happen. I do not think that we could continue the way it was in the early 50s. I think probably the Ruby McCollum case may have brought it to a forefront as far as Suwannee County. It put us in the national spotlight for a while, not in a good light, but at least it was the end of one era and probably the beginning of a new one.
By turning a lens on Live Oak, we don't need to look at Live Oak. We need to look at what Live Oak perhaps represents.
I began by looking for the truth, and on the way found a town still trying to grapple with the legacy of an event that happened over 60 years before, an event camouflaged by decades of lies, myths, and silence.
A lot of people don't like to talk about racism, but racism is alive. And if you're going to do something about it, let's sit down and talk about it.
How do we define ourselves as a nation? Do we continue to sweep under the rug unpleasant, difficult questions of race and class? At least we can talk about it.
The Ruby McCollum case is an opportunity to talk about race in a different kind of way.
It's very seldom that you can get any member of the family to sit and talk about the situation.
Did your mother ever come back here to the house after she got out of Chattahoochee?
No, I never did let her come back. I felt like that would hurt her, really, to come back and not be able to stay, because I always felt like that if she was here, there might have been some type of a threat on her or something. Maybe yeah, maybe no, but just to be safe, we never did.
Do you feel that she was in her right mind?
When?
August 3rd, 1952.
Well, that's hard to say, because like I said, I wasn't here. But I've heard the story that probably he drugged her, that Adams probably drugged her and whatever. And if you know anything about addicts, an addict loves the dealer because that's his source. And that could have been possible. I don't really know that because I wasn't here. But I think as far as he was concerned, I think he had an ultimate goal in mind.
What do you think his goal was?
To get richer.
Was he involved with your father financially at all?
My dad had given him $5,000 in money for election.
What was your father's reaction when Loretta was born?
I don't know. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
And I couldn't say that. There probably wouldn't have been a big reaction to that at the time anyway, because most of us were real light when we were born anyway. So it probably wasn't a first offhand thing, but maybe later on, maybe he realized, you know, what was going on, because she definitely favors Adams. Definitely favors him.
Our meeting with Sam was coming to an end. It was my time to speak to him. I found I didn't have a question, just something I wanted to say, something I felt in my heart since I first read about Ruby McCollum.
I'll never believe that your mother had a relationship willingly with Dr. Adams. I believe he forced her. That's just how I feel about it.
The moment I spoke the words, I regretted it. I felt uneasy inserting my beliefs into Sam's world.
Well, I guess if you really know anything about men and women relationships, being a doctor, I'm sure that he could have tempted her in some way or another, even on examinations. This is why nowadays doctors don't examine females by themselves. They always have to have assistants.
Yeah, you're so true. Yeah, you're so right.
See, during that time, they didn't. You just had a little country doctor. He'd come in and he'd examine a lady just like he examined men.
Yeah.
And everybody took his word at that because he was supposed to be
A god.
a god in the community.
A god in the community. And with those words, we were done.
Y'all have a good one now.
You have a great one. Thank you so much.
Thank you for talking with us.
Okay,
I'm
thank
really
you too.
pleased. Thank you.
Take care.
Sam had shared his truth with me, and something else had happened, something I had not realized was so important. I had shared my truth with him. When Ruby McCollum was silenced, her story was taken over by others. She became what others wanted to see in her. The truth is, none of us can ever speak for Ruby, but we can speak about her. Only then can old wounds heal. Only then can we find closure with the past. Only then can we recognize that none of us belong to anyone except ourselves.